It was a small home in a nondescript neighborhood, suitable for the purpose at hand. The owner, someone who knew someone, had been advised to leave for a few hours. Then, late in the afternoon on this day on Staten Island in May 1984, the men began arriving. They came in 4 cars. Among the visitors, according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was Anthony Salerno. A younger man held the car door open for him. He walked slowly, a cigar in his mouth, a fedora on his head. There was Paul Castellano, a tall man with a commanding presence. There was Gennaro Langella, in a grey business suit, standing in for his superior, Carmine Persico, who was in jail. In all, according to photographs taken by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, 10 men converged on the little borrowed house on Cameron Avenue in South Beach that day. Federal prosecutors believe they represented the upper echelons of 4 of the 5 organized crime families in New York. The main item on the agenda, investigators say, was a discussion of the group's illegal interests in the construction industry of New York City. And they believe the occasion was a meeting of what has come to be known as the Commission, the ruling body of the New York branch of the Cosa Nostra. Starting tomorrow in United States District Court in Manhattan, the alleged members of the Commission will go on trial, the first time in more than 50 years of prosecution that the ruling council of the Cosa Nostra will be judged in a courtroom. United States Attorney Rudolph W. Giuliani's office will argue that the bosses of the mob families have collectively conducted an ongoing criminal conspiracy, a violation of the Federal Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. The prosecutors will try to prove that at meetings like the one on Staten Island, the bosses of the Cosa Nostra conspired to control several of the city's industries, legitimate and otherwise, and that they used murder and other violence to enforce their rule. The Commission trial represents the culmination of a 4-year assault on organized crime by federal, state, and local authorities in the New York area, a crackdown that has brought 300 alleged mobsters and their associates under indictment and stocked the city's federal courtrooms with enough drama to fill several screenplays. An unprecedented use of court-ordered electronic surveillance, bugs hidden in the cars, homes, and hangouts of mobsters, has allowed the Justice Department to bring the inner workings of the Cosa Nostra in New York and other cities into public view. The resulting trials have included charges of virtually every kind of criminality: drug trafficking and bribery, loan sharking and extortion, car theft and union racketeering, and murder. The current round of trials began with 3 simultaneous cases in Manhattan last fall, including the so-called Pizza Connection heroin trafficking case. The assault extends across the nation. More than a dozen family bosses have either been convicted or are now under indictment. In New York, nearly all the defendants in the Commission case are awaiting either trial or sentencing on other indictments that prosecutors see as the building blocks of the Commission case, which they promote as the most important mob trial in history. It is the trial's dimensions that concern some defense attorneys. They argue that such a broad indictment of so many people is unfair. Barry Slotnick, whose firm has represented reputed Gambino boss John Gotti, says that in cases such as the Commission trial, so much evidence is presented that the quantity takes on importance rather than the quality. Another attorney who has defended accused organized crime figures, Harold Price Faringer, has expressed concern that the use of the RICO law to prosecute numerous defendants in one case amounts to proving guilt by association. Impact on organized crime questioned. And some other members of the criminal justice system wonder whether the trial, regardless of the outcome, will result in any permanent damage to organized crime. Speaking generally in 1985, Judge Irving Kaufman, chairman of the President's Commission on Organized Crime, remarked about the long-standing struggle between prosecutors and mobsters. It seemed to me, as I observed this over the years, that nothing really changed. You will put an important mobster in jail for 20 or 40 years, but the business goes on. The commission indictment, handed in February 1985, named the leaders and other key members of the city's 5 crime groups, Castellano and Agnello Della Croce of the Gambino family, Anthony Corallo, Salvatore Santoro, and Christopher Furnari of the Lucchesi family, Langella and Ralph Scopo of the Colombo family, Salerno of the Genovese family, and Philip Rastelli of the Bonanno family. Deaths and conflicting trial schedules have thinned the ranks of the defendants in the trial. Rastelli has been severed from the commission case because he is on trial on other charges in federal court in Brooklyn. And Castellano, considered the most powerful of the commission members, was gunned down in front of a restaurant in Manhattan last December, 2 weeks after his reputed underboss and co-defendant Della Croce died of cancer. Although their deaths have removed the Gambino family, regarded as the city's most powerful with 400 known members, from the commission case, 16 of the group's members were indicted 3 months ago by a federal grand jury in Brooklyn on murder, racketeering, gambling, and extortion charges. The commission trial, though, will still feature big names in testimony, if not in person. Through the tapes made from the bugs planted and the testimony of mobsters turned informants, prosecutors will attempt to show how the Cosa Nostra in New York has dominated major industries at public expense. And in so doing, they may offer some new insights into the organization of organized crime. Some of the results of the electronic surveillance, a hint of what jurors will hear during the next months, are contained in affidavits by Federal Bureau of Investigation agents and in other pre-trial documents filed with the court and obtained by Newsday. In a wiretap recorded by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 1983, Paul Castellano was caught boasting to his maid, Gloria, about the sheer influence he commanded. He leaned back, speaking with the confidence of a man who knew his power was absolute. "They run all the Waldbaum stores, right?" he said casually. "So now they pay me. You know why? Because of my influence." He paused for emphasis, letting the words settle before continuing. "When I sit down, I talk to the man. Oh, Paul, how you feel? How's everything?" That's how it goes. He smirked, as if amused by the simplicity of it all. "I don't care who it is. If the President of the United States, if he's smart, if he needs help, he'd come to me. I could do a favor for the President." He gestured vaguely, then shook his head. "I mean, I'm not like the President. The President's a big man. I'm not like him." He chuckled. "But everybody can do somebody a little favor. You understand, Gloria?" Gloria, whether in awe or simply trained to nod along, murmured her agreement. Castellano just smiled. Some clues also emerge about the relationship of Castellano's murder outside Sparks Steakhouse last December to the rise of John Gotti, who law enforcement experts believe became Castellano's successor as boss of the Gambino family. Why? Castellano was killed. According to surveillance transcripts and statements in court by federal prosecutors, Castellano's murder was probably the culmination of mounting friction between him and a faction of the Gambino family, headed by Gotti, who had the support of Della Croce. Although no charges have been filed, investigators believe Castellano's murder was finally triggered by the death last December 2nd of Della Croce, who had been seen as the Gotti crew's voice at the top. There is also evidence that Gotti was considered a rising star long before his name became a household word earlier this year. A Federal Bureau of Investigation bug placed in the Cedarhurst home of reputed Gambino member Angelo Ruggiero picked up a conversation in 1982 between Ruggiero and Robert DiBernardo, a reputed Gambino soldier who has been missing since June. DiBernardo stated that every family has someone on the sidelines who's being groomed for advancement. Federal Bureau of Investigation agent Donald McCormick said in an affidavit in support of a wiretap application. He mentioned that John Gotti's name had come up on numerous occasions for an administrative position. Gotti's attorney, Bruce Cutler, has denied that Gotti is a member of any crime family. Another affidavit indicates Gotti's rise was tied in part to an aura of violence and almost casual approach to murder. Federal Bureau of Investigation agent Joseph O'Brien testified about a conversation he intercepted in June 1982, in which Gotti's brother, Eugene, discussed a murder contract on Roy DeMeo, a reputed Gambino soldier. Castellano put out feelers to Eugene Gotti and Ruggiero regarding a future contract on DeMeo. Ruggiero and Gotti were somewhat leered by DeMeo because of his reputation and the fact that he had a small army around him. During this conversation, Gene Gotti stated that he and his brother John have only hit 7 or 8 guys, while DeMeo did in at least 37. On a January night 6 months later, DeMeo was found frozen in the trunk of a Cadillac with 5 bullet holes in his body. Other conversations intercepted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation portray the Cosa Nostra as a modern, diversified corporation distinct from the days when it was considered a band of hoodlums specializing in gambling, loan sharking, and such enterprises. Hoodlums seem to remain, but the modern mob has also shown a talent for following the dollar-assuming influence in the construction, carting, garment, meat, and supermarket industries, to name a few. There is even talk on one tape of stock swindles involving a chain of fast food restaurants, a group of Russians, and a profit of $14 million. But insights are also offered about the mob's traditional interests in such commodities as drugs and about long-standing divisions on the issue of whether the Cosa Nostra should get out of drug trafficking because it brings too much attention from law enforcement and the public. The question of drug trafficking. In one conversation in 1982, Ruggiero was heard discussing the question of whether men who have been arrested for narcotics trafficking should be barred from admission to the Cosa Nostra. The New York Commission was apparently split on the question, with Castellano and Persico in favor of the ban on such members, and Corallo and Rastelli against it. "Keep your fingers crossed," Ruggiero, who is under indictment for heroin smuggling, is heard to say, "'cause they may call in the whole commission in the whole United States. If they do that, I got a funny feeling." It is not known how or if the issue was settled, but federal authorities say the mob continues to import copious amounts of drugs, including most of the heroin used in this country. Besides hearing taped conversations, jurors and observers at the commission trial will watch more than 40 prosecution witnesses take the stand. The most important of these will be the insiders, former mobsters who have been converted into undercover agents for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Justice Department has introduced some of them on the road, at trials in venues like Miami and Kansas City, in preparation for their appearances in New York. One of them is Angelo Leonardo, a former Cleveland crime family underboss whose testimony helped convict Chicago crime boss Joseph Aiuppa. Another key witness is Joseph Iannuzzi, a former Gambino family associate who is now in the Federal Witness Protection Program and is one of the Justice Department's star witnesses. Iannuzzi was the key to a South Florida gambling and loan shark case that resulted in the indictment of 2 Gambino capos, whose case is pending, and the conviction of a police chief. One who won't testify is Joseph Bonanno, a self-described original member of the Cosa Nostra's National Commission. Bonanno, 82 and retired in Arizona, has been in jail for a year for his refusal to give videotape testimony. Law enforcement's ears getting keener. The trial of the commission comes against a backdrop of increased law enforcement intelligence in recent years about the structure of organized crime information gleaned from investigations by federal, state, and local authorities, and from testimony before the President's Commission on Organized Crime, which studied the mob for more than 2 years. Chicago's 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Notwithstanding, it is New York, organized crime experts say, that has been the city of mobsters. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, half the nation's 2,000 known organized crime members and 20,000 associates operate in the New York area. The 5 New York families are among 24 nationwide that have, by tradition, with one exception, fallen under a national commission formed in 1931 by Charles Lucky Luciano. The exception, the New Orleans crime family, was the first such crime network in the United States, and rarely opposes decisions affecting the other crime families. But the National Commission has been largely dormant, according to experts in law enforcement. Listening devices placed by New York State's Organized Crime Task Force in a Jaguar owned by Salvatore Avellino of Nissequogue, a reputed Long Island member of the Lucchese family, yielded indications that New York's 5 bosses form the only commission that counts, and that out-of-town bosses are called in for advice only. The Presidential Commission heard testimony on the structure of Cosa Nostra families from former insiders. One of them was Martin Light, formerly a prominent lawyer for mob figures, who's now serving a 15-year prison term for possession of heroin. His testimony, based on years as an intimate associate of the Colombo family, could serve as a primer for spectators at the commission trial. No pay-for-murder contracts. The basic structure of organized crime has been documented for some time. Family leaderships are composed of bosses and underbosses at the top. The consigliere advises the boss, but has no leadership authority. Capos or captains supervise the family's day-to-day operations. And the basic rank of membership is the soldier. A soldier, Light said, has a crew of associates who are usually not made members of organized crime. There are limits to Cosa Nostra memberships, and decisions to open up the books, Light said, usually come from the commission. Light described the importance of having a good crew. The more people you have, the more money they are going to make, the more money they are going to turn into you, the more you are going to earn, the more money that you give up to your captain, and the money filters up to the boss, and the boss is going to take recognition that this guy is an earner. So, you may be in line for a promotion, eventually. Light also offered dramatic testimony about the violence of organized crime. Murder contracts, he said, are coveted by some crews because that gives them prestige. Despite mob law, custom forbids members from being paid for murders. They are expected to carry out such tasks for the family as ordered. Light described one situation in which Gregory Scarpa, a reputed Colombo soldier, was involved in an apparently important dispute with another soldier. The resolution was unusually swift and violent. The two of them were called to a sit-down. There were 2 people sitting there. I just assumed they were captains or above, and Scarpa told his side of the story, and they told him to step outside, and then this other fellow came in and told his side. When he got up and was told he could leave, as he exited the bar, if he lost the sit-down, then he was going to get killed. So he was excited at first. As he was going around the corner, the other fellow came out, and Scarpa, heard the shots. And the other fellow got killed, right on the sidewalk. Asked if organized crime's system of justice provided a system for appeals, Light said, "No, you can't appeal. Once you're dead, that's it." The Federal Bureau of Investigation, RICO, and Giuliani get together. The crackdown that led to the commission indictment stems from the convergence of 3 occurrences. A decision by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to pursue the Cosa Nostra under the RICO law, an increased use of electronic surveillance on suspected mobsters, and the arrival in New York of Giuliani, who had been Deputy Attorney General in Washington. Cosa Nostra investigations, based on the RICO law, had been underway in New York since 1980, when Robert Blakey, a law professor who had helped draft the statute, showed the Federal Bureau of Investigation how to use RICO to pursue the mob. With Giuliani's arrival in 1983 as United States Attorney for New York's Southern District, the Federal Bureau of Investigation found an enthusiastic prosecutor, an Italian-American from Brooklyn who resented the stereotypes the Cosa Nostra encouraged. Giuliani's attack on the commission followed a visit by Ronald Goldstock, head of the state organized crime task force, whose investigators had placed the bug in Avellino's Jaguar, in which the commission was mentioned several times. Making innovative use of a law allowing broader application of wiretaps and bugs, Giuliani set his sights on the Cosa Nostra's top tier. His interest was also piqued by something he read in 1983. Joseph Bonanno's autobiography, which contained this description of the birth of the Commission in 1931. We revised the old custom of looking toward one man, one supreme leader for advice and for the settling of disputes. We opted for a parliamentary arrangement whereby a group of the most important men in our world would assume the function formerly performed by one man. This group became known as the Commission. Though Bonanno has refused to testify at the trial, his book is expected to be entered into evidence in the Commission case. Over the next 3 years, the Justice Department intensified its electronic surveillance of mobsters in their homes and clubs. They got others too. The words of mobsters and their associates, captured through public testimony, law enforcement wiretaps, and their own biographies, offer a rare glimpse into the inner workings of the Cosa Nostra. Here are some revealing excerpts. In a conversation recorded by the FBI, 2 of Chicago's most powerful mob figures, Sam Giancana and Tony Accardo, vented their frustrations about Joseph Bonanno's decision to position his son, Bill Bonanno, as the boss of the Tucson crime family. Giancana: Bonanno made his son, that young kid in Tucson. Accardo: made him the boss in Tucson now, huh? He's in position. Figures New York's getting too hot, so now he brings his son over there. And with his son? He's the power behind the throne. The frustration was clear. Bonanno's move wasn't just about keeping power in the family. It was about outmaneuvering his rivals, something that didn't sit well with the Chicago bosses. Inside a private home in Inwood, 2 wives of Lucchese family associates exchanged complaints over another case of nepotism, this time within their own ranks. The son of reputed Lucchese capo Paul Vario, who they saw as unworthy, had been inducted into the Cosa Nostra. Christine: how can his brother have a birthday party, get initiated when he ain't worth 2 cents? Terry: that's what Louis said, but you knew it was coming. You know how it works. If you're a doctor, your son's a doctor. If you're a dentist, your son's a dentist. So if you have a birthday party, your son has a birthday party. There was no use arguing. Legacy, no matter how undeserved, ruled the day. A wiretap captured former Genovese family boss Thomas Eberly discussing the importance of the Mafia'S governing body, the Commission. Eberly: if one member can dispute a commission order, you can say goodbye to the Cosa Nostra. The Commission is the backbone of the Cosa Nostra. Without it, we'd be like the Irish mobs, always fighting among ourselves. There'd be gang wars like the old days. For men like Eberly, the Commission wasn't just bureaucracy, it was the glue that kept the organization from tearing itself apart. Former mob enforcer James "Jimmy the Weasel" Fratianno testified before the President's Commission on Organized Crime, offering a street-level perspective on the Commission's role. Fratianno: if there's a problem between one family and another, then yeah, you go to the Commission, and they settle it. But they got nothing to do with who we kill, who we do business with. They don't get involved in that. It was a stark contrast to the image of the Commission as an all-powerful ruling body. It had influence, but its reach had limits. One of the 5 family's original bosses, Joseph Bonanno, reflected on the true purpose of the Commission in his autobiography. Bonanno: on substantive issues we agreed, no family, no boss, should interfere with another family's affairs. But the Commission, as an agent of harmony, could arbitrate disputes brought before it. The Commission had influence, but no direct executive power. It had respect only insofar as its individual members commanded respect. More than anything else, the Commission was a forum. In Bonanno's words, the Commission was less a dictatorship and more a council. Its authority came from the men who sat at its table. Unlike IBM or AT&T directors who conduct their private meetings in paneled corporate boardrooms, members of the nation's most powerful criminal board, the New York Commission of the Cosa Nostra, convene in the privacy of apartment kitchens, warehouse offices, family homes, and the backrooms of restaurants, wherever they can talk confidentially without the prying eyes and electronic ears of law enforcement. What little is known about the meetings of the commission which goes on trial tomorrow comes from conversations that have been bugged, legally and illegally, by law enforcement authorities over the years. These meetings are convened for assorted reasons. Reputed mob boss Joseph Bonanno was challenged on 2 occasions for trying to set up a business for his son in 1959 and for threatening to kill other family bosses in 1966, according to conversations bugged at the time. On 2 other occasions in the past 2 years, the Commission has met to debate narcotics traffic and to resolve a dispute in the concrete industry. Generally, the routine was the same. The security and privacy demanded by the family leaders are exceeded only by the exhaustive preparations for the occasions when they meet. Joseph Cantalupo, a Federal Bureau of Investigation informant who recorded conversations of his mob friends, is expected to testify at the commission trial. He described for Newsday the security and the preparations for one commission meeting in 1969. One day in 1969, reputed boss Joseph Colombo came over to me in the office and asked me, "Can I use your home for a meeting?" At the time, I lived in an apartment at 1460 83rd Street in Brooklyn. Now, he gave me only 1 night's notice, and because of who he was and how close we were, I would never think of saying no. He said to me, "Have your wife buy a couple of pounds of Italian cookies, mixed sesame seed, almond, anisette, pignoles." He said, "Tomorrow night tell her to make a large pot of demi-tasse coffee and have her go out for the night. I want you to sit down on the stoop of the apartment." I set up a table, an octagon-shaped table in the kitchenette, with the cookies and the demi-tasse cups. The coffee was left on the stove. At about 7 o'clock in the evening, I was seated on the stoop when the first car drove up with Colombo. Rocco Miraglia, Colombo's bodyguard, was the driver. Colombo stepped out of the car, said, "Hello, Joe," and walked up the steps past me to the apartment. Rocco pulled away and he returned on foot, parking around the block. About 20 minutes later, the next to pull up was Carl Gambino. He got out, said hello to me, and walked away while Jimmy Brown, reputed Capo James Filer, his driver, pulled away and drove off. After those 3 more cars, each at about 3 or 4-minute intervals, pulled up. The meeting ended after about 2 hours. All that time I sat out on the stoop acting as a lookout. Their drivers, except for Miraglia, who was bodyguarding the meeting, were all in their cars, circling the area, or parked a block or 2 away. They knew exactly when to return, and they came back at 10 or 15-minute intervals, picking up their bosses one by one after the meeting was over. When I returned to the apartment, the coffee was finished, but there were still a lot of cookies remaining. By the time my wife returned at 11 o'clock from a church bingo game, they, the visitors, were all long gone. A construction meet. Among the most recent commission meetings the Federal Bureau of Investigation observed took place May 15, 1984, in a private home at 34 Cameron Avenue, South Beach, Staten Island, where Paul Castellano, the late reputed Gambino family boss, presided over problems of mob collections from New York's construction industry. At that meeting, according to federal sources and surveillance photographs, there were representatives of the Genovese, Colombo and Lucchesi families, bosses, underbosses, bodyguards, and special family experts in the construction industry. There the routine was similar, with the crime family leaders arriving at intervals and drivers posting lookouts throughout the secluded neighborhood, according to authorities. One of the first gatherings of organized crime leaders uncovered by authorities was discovered by police on December 5, 1928, when 24 members of what was then the Sicilian Mafia in America were raided by police in an unpretentious room of the Hotel Statler in Cleveland. The meeting occurred shortly after a violent change in Cleveland's leadership, but police have never been able to determine the subject of that meeting. Nearly 30 years later, police accidentally discovered another major Cosa Nostra conclave in November 1957 at the secluded estate of Joseph LaBarbera Jr. in Appalachian, New York. State police found more than 60 reputed top hoodlums from across the United States having a giant barbecue and get-together. The meeting followed by 2 weeks the murder of Brooklyn mobster Albert Anastasia and came in the midst of a Senate investigation of labor racketeering and a growing threat to gambling casinos in Cuba. But again, police could only speculate about the reason for the meeting. The end of an era. Appalachian marked the end of an era. Mob conclaves and meetings of the full membership of the National Commission declined in following years. The National Commission, in 1959, according to Federal Bureau of Investigation tapes, had 12 members. By 1965, membership had declined to 9 and was dominated by the 5 families of New York. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has tapes, Newsday has learned, in which Anthony Salerno, reputed boss of the Genovese crime family, says that the last national meeting took place in San Francisco nearly a decade ago. But meetings of the New York family bosses, now collectively known as the Commission, and mini-meetings of the same group have been held regularly, as frequently as 8 times a year, according to federal investigators. On September 22, 1966, the Cosa Nostra held a mini-conclave of bosses, acting bosses, and their representatives at the La Stella restaurant on Queens Boulevard, Forest Hills, which was raided by police. Santos Traficante of Florida and Carlos Marcello of Louisiana, both reputed bosses but not members of the Commission, were in attendance, as were Carlo Gambino, his underboss, Agnello Della Croce, family consigliere Joseph Gallo, and representatives of the Lucchese and Genovese crime families. A grand jury investigated, but no indictments resulted. It wasn't until March 1983 when the New York State Organized Crime Task Force installed a bug in the Jaguar of Lucchese soldier Salvatore Avellino of Nissequogue that police and, later, federal agencies were able to learn of meeting arrangements and subsequently watch the bosses or their representatives meet or attempt to meet under extreme security and protection at the Bari Bari, a restaurant supply warehouse on Canal Street, and the Fisherman's Net, a restaurant on East 34th Street in Manhattan that has since closed. They had to watch them from afar with light-intensified binoculars and cameras with telephoto lenses, and even then the Canal Street surveillance was blown, and the meeting disbanded when federal agents were spotted tailing Castellano to the meeting.